All right, well, hi everybody. You are listening to a career advice webinar by the Royal Australian Chemical Institute, the professional association for chemists in Australia. I'm Dave Samet, coordinator of the RACI Mentoring Programme. This is the 5th webinar in our series. It's entitled Star Stories and the Wider Interview Process. The point is that most professional recruiters and employers will use some variation of behavioural-based interviewing. The best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour, and they're going to try to learn about candidates by asking about their previous experience, not just with specific tasks, but with the wider skill set of getting tasks done, achieving outcomes, and most importantly, getting along with others. So I'm joined today by 4 excellent panellists, all of whom are working, well, that's actually just become a little bit unlikely, but working as recruiters or regularly interview and employ staff. Soraya Jamar is a graduate of the mentoring program from 2018 and is currently working as a scientific recruitment consultant for tech staff. Scott Colburn is an active RACI member, chair of the New South Wales Pharmaceutical Group and a mentor in the program, and sometimes find time for his day job, which until recently was manager of the Australian Laboratory Services pharmaceutical facility at Rydalmere, and has recently transitioned into the IT sector, again still with ALS. Peter Rowe is a professional recruitment consultant and National Client Services Manager with CS Executive Group in Melbourne, which also runs a specialist program for final year students in Victoria. That program is called UniWorks, and it's a really great idea. It's a really great opportunity for students to gain experience in their final year and be much better prepared for the workplace. So it's definitely something worth looking up, UniWorks, on the CS Executive website. And finally, Philip Zamora is a program coordinator at the Australian Network on Disability, which runs an excellent national mentoring program for people with a broad range of disabilities. And that does include people in the STEM careers. So it's quite a broad definition of disability, from mild to profound, and we would encourage you, if you do have any type of disability, to look at that program to see if it might be something that that could be of use to you. So, Soraya, Scott, Peter, and Philip, welcome, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, now, hopefully that slide has just changed for everybody. Peter, as our, sorry, actually that was the slide that I was supposed to be doing when I was introducing everybody. Well done, Dave. Okay, opening remarks. Peter, as our most experienced recruiter, would you like to explain how you use behavioural-based interviewing in your work?
Sure, thanks, Dave. So my experience in behavioural-based interviewing came from my previous career when I was a hiring manager in a scientific organisation and a consumer goods company. And so we were trained on how to do behavioural-based interviews as part of that. And essentially what we're trying to do, as Dave said earlier, we're trying to understand behaviours so that we can predict the future. And the interview would be against specific categories. So we'd sit down and do a job brief before we'd start interviewing people, figure out what the behaviours that we really wanted to see, what was important, whether it was a problem solving or that sort of attribute, and then we'd design the questions around that. And again, so quite specific, and then trying to understand the person's previous history around how they work in problem solving, for example, and then how that would then translate to the opportunity they're working for our company. Now, having been in recruitment for 4 years, it hasn't changed that much in terms of what we're still trying to do. What we want to understand is how the person would operate in our client, and how they would then solve our client's problem, which is why they come to us. They want a resource to achieve something, and so it's unpacking that and then determining their individual behaviour and how that'll actually contribute to solving our problem.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter. So, Soraya, would you like to explain the star story approach to participants?
Okay, sure will, Dave. Okay, so the star story approach is something I actually came across when I was a mentee in the mentoring program, and ever since then I've been kind of employing it with every interview I had been in prior to getting this job at Techstaff. So I guess the STAR method really is just a kind of structured way of responding to behavioural-based interview questions, I guess, by discussing the specific situation, the task, the action, and I guess the result of the situation you're describing. So for example, if you get a question like describe a stressful situation and how you handled it.
Whoop, we just lost Soraya. Apologies, everybody. I'm sure she'll come and rejoin us momentarily. But look, I'll pick up. So the point is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to, I mean, STAR is sort of, it's a duplicate acronym because it's situation, task, action, response. That's the structure of how you answer your question, but it also is a way of putting yourself forward, showing that behaviour in the best possible light. Here we go. Soraya is just rejoining us momentarily. So it's...
Okay, I am back. I do not know what happened. I'm sorry, my apologies. Shall I continue?
Absolutely.
Okay, so say for example, you're asked a question, or I was asked a question of like, describe a stressful situation and how I handled it. The way in which I would use the STAR approach is by first breaking it down. So S stands for situation, and that's where I would begin by describing the situation I was in, or I guess the task that I needed to accomplish. And then I'd proceed with T, the task, and that's where I kind of go into kind of what goals I was working towards. And then A stands for action, and that's where you kind of begin describing the actions that you took to, I guess, address this situation, and I guess what specific steps I guess one would have taken, and I guess what my particular contribution was. And then last but not least, R is for results. That's where you would kind of begin describing the outcome of your, I guess, actions and what you accomplished. So yeah.
So that's the basics. So out to the panelists. Who wants to jump in? You know, what makes for a good STAR story? All right, I'll ask you, Philip.
I think it's more being concise and being honest with your answer as well. Of course, we would like for the result to be positive, but you know, all the situation will not give us always a positive outcome. But I think being honest and being concise with your answer, and giving that example from your previous work experience, having that straight, concise answer will make a difference as well. Thank you.
Now, Philip, you talked about from your previous work experience, but the point is it doesn't have to be scientific work experience. It could be any kind of work experience, right?
Any kind of work experience. Like previously, we do attend a mentoring program, and then different type of students came to the program. They are studying different disciplines and degree. Therefore, they have few experiences that they can use, but in the selection or the format of STAR technique.
Absolutely. So Scott, over the last years, you have interviewed what, easily 100 people, probably more?
Yeah, plenty.
All right. Did you use behavioural-based questions?
Yeah, look. In the laboratory, try and promote from within ALS. So generally, the roles that came up were more entry-level roles. So wasn't really so interested in your experience in the industry. You wouldn't have any. It was really all around those behavioural-based questions. So really, yeah, that just trying to find out, mate, are you going to be a team player? Are you going to be proactive? All those questions we're going to ask. And if you don't have specific examples for things, it's very hard to make that judgment. So yeah, very important to us. And look, you made a good point about, I'm glad you made the point about work that's not science-based, because, you know, just talking to my mentee recently, we were talking about, you know, when have you been in a difficult situation or had a problem, and work facing the public in a bakery, you must see difficult customers every single day. You know what I mean? More than in the science industry. So you got very good examples. Please use them.
Yeah.
I think kind of the story isn't really the important thing. It's pretty much the behavior that you demonstrate in that story, I guess. It's the way in which you've handled these situations. So I guess the story could be anything, really. It's just a matter of really kind of addressing you know, the question and really kind of, you know, demonstrating the key behaviour you think should be highlighted in response to that question, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if I can jump in on that. So when I'm looking at someone, I'm looking to understand what they've achieved and then how they've achieved it. And so the what is what Scott was saying, was in terms of people's prehistory prior to an entry-level role. The what won't necessarily be in a scientific context, but the how they've achieved it will be.
Yeah.
Will be from a behavioural point of view, how they've gone about working with others, showing initiative, solving problems, dealing with pressure and stress from, you know, customer baker's delight. Those sorts of behaviours then we're using to predict how the person will then behave in the workplace. And so therefore you achieve the what, the objective of the task, through the how. So that's why behaviour is so important.
So Peter, since I've got you speaking, I mean, Scott mentioned a moment ago that, you know, he hires a lot of people down towards the graduate level where they don't have a lot of experience. But you're, of course, you're much further up the line. You know, you'd be people who've been in the industry for a few years or maybe even quite a few years. But I would imagine that the questions of how are they going to fit into the organisation are every bit as important even then as the questions of what have you previously done in terms of experience.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of characteristics of the person and how they operate, how much drive and initiative they have, they're the things we want to understand. And in terms of even energy, in terms of are they projecting themselves really well? Is this role going to be important from an influencing point of view? So if I was getting on my hobby horse around climate change, for example, one of the issues I have from a climate change point of view is chemists and scientists aren't particularly good at influencing non-scientists. And that's around communication and actually recognising the audience's needs rather than the individual needs to project information. So that's a key skill that you learn as you mature around how to influence, being able to be succinct and like Philip was saying, around being concise and succinct and getting to the point so that the communication happens, because it's the receiver that says whether the communication has been successful or not.
Mm-hmm. And Soraya, what about, you know, when you're listening to people and you're still, you know, close to the beginning of your career, so a lot of this is still very fresh for you. Mm-hmm. You know, what are the factors that you're looking for in a good star response?
One that's clear and concise, and one that kind of really kind of gets to the point. And I think most candidates will kind of get a bit overwhelmed and start jumping around and you know, going from one story to another. So being able to really kind of present your response in a logical way is always a great start. But really kind of focusing on pretty much, I guess, in your response, really kind of focusing on kind of the skills that you really want to kind of highlight through the way in which you kind of handled that particular situation. So I guess, yeah, like I said, it's not so much so about the story, but really kind of focusing on identifying what behaviour are they really kind of trying to, you know, suss out within this question, and how can I communicate it in the best way possible.
And by skills, you're not just talking technical skills, but also the non-technical skills.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. It's. I guess when I'm speaking to people, I'm not only kind of looking at their technical skills and their qualifications, but what other skills can they offer, and, you know, how am I able to kind of identify those skills within their response.
Excellent. Okay, so everybody, what common mistakes do people make with their star stories? Philip, we'll jump back to you.
Yeah. So I think not really being, as I've said, not answering the question at all, or giving like or choosing the not so appropriate example, for example, in that questions, or not being prepared, or sometimes being too prepared. The way they answer, it's very constructed. It's like he or she memorized it during the beforehand, and telling the story that it's anything but a success. You know, not giving a positive and negative, or not giving a variety of example, not a variety of result as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll personally zero in on something that Soraya didn't say, but indicated when she was talking about star stories. She used the word I a lot. And that's really important in star stories. You want to talk about I and not we. But Philip, Peter, sorry, pardon me.
That's all right. So in terms of mistakes, I think not having an outcome, the result, clearly articulated in mind when start talking. So giving an example, and it happens in interviews where people actually haven't thought through how they're going to respond to behavioural interview questions. And so they start meandering, like to the point earlier, they start meandering and actually not get actually to an end point with this is what happened and this is what I achieved. So I think that's, begin with the end in mind is a saying out of Steve Covey, and that's really important in terms of being able to tell a succinct story and being concise. And then also recognising that sometimes you need to massage the message such that you are shown in a good light, even if the thing that you're talking about failed. And so that one of those things in a good light might be, this is what I learned. This is what I then have been able to then demonstrate. I've learned from this and applied it elsewhere and been successful. So, as an interviewer, you want someone who's able to make a mistake, absolutely, but not make the same mistake twice. Demonstrating that learning behaviour is very important too.
You're absolutely right. So, Scott, interviewing a lot of younger chemists, or I shouldn't say younger, early career chemists, you must have seen some doozies along the way.
Look, mine's pretty obvious. It's just when someone uses some generic answer because they don't have a specific example. But people who've done well in interviews said, I can't think of an example, and then halfway through the interview, they think of one and go back to that question again. Nothing wrong with that. Can't always think of one on the spot. So, and that's pretty good. But yeah, it's generally that they're just wishy-washy. Or the only other thing someone might do is kind of have a question where they don't appreciate the person on the other side of the table doesn't understand the technology or whatever they're talking about, and they don't really understand what they're going on about. So they lose them halfway through, and you've stopped listening. So then you've got no chance. And look, I'm easily distracted. But no, there was something we talked about earlier, and like it is to do with the way you tell the story. Because in ALS, we'll generally have a technical person and someone from HR doing an interview. The HR person is not listening to the technical part of the answer at all. They're just looking at your body language and how you answer it. It's all they're looking for. Why have them there? Because that's how they help me.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about body language and things later in this. I'm going to raise that question a little later in this webinar. But in the meantime, let's talk about some actual star stories. Now, a typical star story, I'll just quickly say, it's an open question. It's not a closed question. And it's not a hypothetical. It's not what would you do? It's about tell me about a time when you were faced with a given situation, when you had to do something, right? So I've got a list of questions that I have pre-shown to our panellists. And I'd like everybody to have a go at sort of telling me what you would like to see. How would you answer one of these questions well? Philip, why don't you start? Pick any question you like and tell us how it would be answered well.
Oh, put me on the spot there.
See, what you do is you have to prep for these questions. So we've all got 75 examples for each, but I can't think of any right now.
I wasn't necessarily going to say, go back to your experience and actually answer the question. But I guess, as example, if I said to you, Philip, tell me about a time. Well, sorry, if you were asking a candidate, I should say, if you were asking a candidate to tell you about a time when they had to resolve a conflict with a colleague, what are the markers that you're looking for in their response?
I think the action situation first, and mainly the action and the task that the action that they did to solve a problem or to solve a conflict with a colleague, the way they approach it, the language. Do they use inclusive language with that? Sometimes, in our mentoring program, our tendency is, because we're dealing with people with disability, we have to use a very inclusive language to communicate with them. Yep.
Absolutely. And I presume you'd also...
I think in terms of that, inclusive language applies to everybody. Because if you're looking at particularly at conflict, the worst thing you can say is, I delegated that upwards to my boss to manage.
Yeah.
So essentially what we're wanting to see is someone's able to work through that conflict with the colleague and come to a positive outcome where they have an agreed way of working going forward.
True.
The thing you can have
in
with
the
someone
workplace,
who's...
it's okay to disagree. It's not okay to fight.
Yes.
Yeah, look, and the quickest way to resolve a small thing is just to talk to the person. It's probably a misunderstanding, and then you move forward. But we frightened of that sometimes. So yeah, look, those kinds of things. You just want to see that someone's going to, like you say, they learn from it, or they can tell you that they've made mistakes, because people can't admit mistakes. They struggle to learn stuff. So we want to know that someone will make a mistake, learn from it, move on, and then they'll just be better and better.
Yeah.
I've got to say, in a conflict one, I also look for the language about, for want of a better word, blame. If a person says, I had a part to play in that conflict, versus that conflict was all somebody else's fault. Okay, Soraya, pick a question. What one do you love to ask questions and ask candidates, and how do you like to hear it responded to?
I really kind of like to ask, I guess, how they deal with the difficult colleagues. That pretty much allows me to kind of learn a lot about the candidate's character, whether or not they're a people's person, or do they shy away from conflict, or how they're willing to address, I guess, these difficult situations. So that's pretty much one question I really do like to ask most candidates. Yeah.
And what are you looking for? What makes a good response to you?
I guess pretty much, what their approach is and what their strategy is. Do they try and handle it themselves first before escalating it? I guess, are they able to kind of, really try and exhaust all kind of strategies, like I said, before escalating it? And that to me shows that there's someone who really will, I guess, put themselves in the situation where they will put the responsibility on them, and seeing how they kind of go about finding a resolution to the problem, what their approach is, and I guess what outcome they kind of, tend to gain through that. So, yeah.
Now, I think it's very interesting that our panelists have immediately gravitated to those questions that talk about getting on with other people. I mean, it's just such a fundamental aspect. Most employers don't want to hire a dysfunctional genius. They'd much rather hire somebody who may not be quite as good at the job, but who's going to get along well with their colleagues, because it's going to make the whole process go more smoothly. Would you agree with that, everybody?
Absolutely.
Yeah, look, we sometimes have, say, two candidates. One's got all the experience and we think we don't need to train them very much. The other one's got some and can learn it. And we pick the one without the fit, and we end up suffering for that. So yeah, you got to get the fit. You can teach all the technical stuff. We can teach other stuff. It's just a lot harder. And look, I've been a manager for years, and the HR stuff kills you if you've got conflict to deal with all the time, because we just don't get with, ALS like to make money, you see, so we want to do that instead.
Yeah.
But I think beyond anything, everything, attitude is the most important thing, because I think, as was discussed, that you can teach most of the specifics of the job, but you can't teach someone a particular attitude. You can't, get them to behave in a particular way. That's inherent, I guess.
Absolutely. But the other key set of questions that very commonly comes into an interview is questions about those star moments in a person's career, when they've gone over the top, when they've shown leadership, when they've had to really juggle to get something done so that it's just not part of the ordinary course of work. So Peter, out of those questions, when you had to go above and beyond, when you had to balance competing priorities, when you ask a question like that, what are you looking for in an answer?
So in terms of, I think what I'm after is the things that the person's most proud of, because that really gets a sense of their motivations, for one, and also, that they actually realise their role in that and how they've achieved what they've achieved. Because that is a sort of the emotional intelligence of their growth, or learning how do they go about their work and achieving their outcomes based on their strengths. Because everyone's got different strengths and everyone's got different weaknesses. And my view is not necessarily about practicing your weaknesses, it's actually about polishing your strengths. So someone who's been able to over-deliver against something, that really gives me an insight into how they tick. So that's what I'm looking for, is to get that understanding of how they tick. And also, recognise that they're proud of their achievement, because someone who's really motivated to deliver, that's a key moment that you want to be able to place that person in a role where they're going to have a challenge that they can then do the same thing. And because that reflects well on them, it also reflects well on us as a recruiter.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think it just did, when it comes to that, just describe exactly how you went above and beyond about the requirements, explain the outcome, and because by answering the questions with a specific example as well, so the interviewee or the candidate will be able to show the interviewer that he or she is ready to go above and beyond the assigned duties.
Absolutely. Scott, you had a comment to make?
Oh, look, I was just going to say that, personally, I look for proactivity in a person. So those kind of questions because I'm oversimplifying it, but if you're proactive, I can teach most other things. That's really hard to teach that one. So someone who's always looking for someone else to do, and when there's, looking for other stuff and going above and beyond, they're going to go a long way.
Absolutely. Well, I've got you then, Scott. The word leadership. Students love to, or graduates love to use it. What's your attitude?
Yeah, see, we do use that question. Everybody, and I've been guilty of this early in my career. People talk about leadership and you think about being a manager or a coach or something. It's not, it's just showing leadership. So sometimes you have to reiterate the question a little bit, like where you've shown good example of leadership. But yeah, it is a good one. It's not always easy for someone early in their career to answer, I must admit. So I don't hold them too accountable to that one if they're early in their career. It's a bit, sometimes I think you struggle to come up with an example. I think that's what my experience has been anyway in that one.
Right. But sometimes I think leadership is more than just telling people what to do. It's about demonstrating behaviours that are laudable that others can follow. And that is something that even a graduate can do.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think they just struggled with the concept, even when we reword it, kind of thing. I think without giving them an answer in an interview, that's just what I've seen in my personal experience. So.
Yeah. So, Soraya, you know my thoughts on the word leadership, but what about you now?
So what I think about it?
Or? Well, leadership questions and how can a graduate talk about that in an interview well?
Yeah, so I do. When I do interview most candidates that really haven't had any work experience but have just been at uni most of their time. So leadership the way in which they can kind of discuss their leadership skills is through projects they've done at uni, kind of how they worked in a team, how they worked on projects together, how they took on the role of a leader within such projects. So I guess when most candidates don't have, I guess, work-related leadership experience, referring back to kind of projects they've worked on and, how they would have taken on the leadership roles is a great way to, I guess, talk about that.
Absolutely. All right. The classic question, tell me about a time when you failed at a task. Philip, what are you looking for in a response when you have to talk about failure in the workplace?
I think the action, again, I'll focus on I'm just speaking on behalf, based on experience with some current mentee and interns that we have. We're looking for the action and strategy and any strategy that they to achieve a positive or any kind of result, at least what language that they use, what action, what is the outcome, do they consult the person in charge, the manager, supervisor?
Absolutely. My first day in the workplace, I'd like to say I broke $1,500 worth of equipment.
Oh.
And my manager looked at it and says, well, don't do that again. And I didn't.
I think if I can build on that, Dave, in terms of part of what we're looking for is resilience. So if someone's able to fail at a task and not shrivel up and not attempt something again, that's obviously really important. So we want to get a bit of resilience. And like I said earlier, people make mistakes. So it's whether they've learned from that. And so part of this question in terms of the task is trying to understand how they learn and how they take responsibility and accountability.
Yep.
You mentioned before around blame in terms of a situation where, in terms of conflict, if someone doesn't take some personal responsibility and act to change, then that's a problem. a problem waiting to happen in terms of a candidate. So that's what we're looking for there.
Yep, and then also we're looking, just want to add more into that, it's just, we're looking for honesty in there. Even though it's not really, it's not the expected action or words that they will use, but at least being honest to what happened, what is the situation, what is the outcome, because honesty will make along, it will bring you to places, because you do not sugarcoat, as they said, that what you cannot do or what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott, you had a comment?
Oh, look, I was just going to say, look, I think we do want to see that something's gone wrong, you've learned from it, and you can admit defeat, and you can take responsibility and things like that. So come with examples. That don't say, oh, I can't think of anything, nothing's ever gone wrong. Or when I say, what are your weaknesses? And you say, oh, I don't know much about food testing, then that's not a weakness. That's, you haven't started the job yet, type of thing. So it's very important, because otherwise we don't get any feel for that at all from you. So it's certainly important. I think sometimes people are worried about saying something negative about themselves, but you've got to be honest, as Philip just said as well, because we need to find out what you're like. Because if we don't think you're fit, you're not going to do it, and you're not going to enjoy it either. So it's a two-way street with these things.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, one other key aspect that's important here as well too is the subtext. Soraya talked about this a little bit before. What does the example that you've chosen say about you? Now, I'm going to give an example. I was doing a mock interview with a student a year or two ago, and I was asked them to give me an example of a time when they had to solve a problem within a team environment. And he gave an example of a task that a group of students had been asked to do, where they had to model various climate change scenarios and model the outcome. And they had to choose 3 levels of climate change. His colleagues within the group wanted to do no climate change, moderate and high. And in his response, he was very proudly boasted about that he just steadfastly refused to do a 0 climate change model because that was a waste of time. And he made the other students do it his way, and they got a good mark. But the message that I received was that this guy was sufficiently intellectually arrogant that he wouldn't even consider an alternative to his point of view, and he strong-armed everyone around him into doing things his way, rightly or wrongly, right? Now, that's the subtext that I got out of that. And he was really quite surprised when what I heard was so different from what he intended. So I guess, Peter, that example of subtext, when does it go well? When does it go wrong?
So I didn't quite follow you on that question, but in terms of it, that paraphrases what I was saying earlier around the what and the how. So the what they've obviously achieved was a great mark, but the how done it is he's basically bullied people, which says he's not a team player. So, and if you think about, when I think about team performance and storming, norming, and then eventually performing, they haven't got to the end where as a collective, they're a team, it's just a group. So if they're then faced with some future challenges, they're not going to perform as well, because the person is in their, as you say, with his intellectual arrogance, without the emotional intelligence to go, actually, we need to compromise to get the best result for the group, not just for me as an individual. So think about the way he influences people and having his environmental radar up is what I'm talking about. So I'm not, if that answers your question, Dave, because I didn't.
It does. I'm looking, yeah. I mean, do you have an example of somebody who has given you a star story that came across completely not the way they intended?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the example I used before was around the conflict, back to the conflict again, where someone was talking about how there's a standard for the environment she's working in. Someone walked through and didn't adhere to that standard. And rather than address that person, she's elevated to her manager to then, for then her manager then to talk to that person's manager and then tell that person their behaviour was inappropriate in terms of the standards of being the environment they were in. So the outcome of that, to me, yes, she got the result. That person adhered to the standards, but he didn't like it, and so they would not have a good working relationship. So that's someone said that to me in an interview, and I was like, yeah, I'm not sure why you've used that example, because it doesn't show her in the best light.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, Soraya keeps dropping in and out here, but Philip, unintended consequences of a behavioural-based answer.
What do you mean in that? Sorry.
So we're talking about when people get their behavioural-based questions wrong, and they pass a message that they don't intend. What's been your experience with that?
I think giving the feed, if they didn't directly answer or give a good example or good answer with the behavioral questions, it's basically I will dig deep. I will ask other questions that relate to that questions, just to make sure that to get out of the answer that we need. If the candidate is not giving that answer, then we have to move on. But we need to give that feedback to them.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and just building on that, Dave, if the story is that bad, then I actually stop the interview and coach them how to answer a behavioural-based question. Because people who haven't experienced behavioural questions before, you can't expect them to be good at it. So trying to then reword what they've told me into a better answer, and then say, right, so now I'm going to ask you a different question. What I'm looking for is situation, task, what you did, and then give me a positive result of what you thought of. And so generally, it's in the coaching moment of an interview. Doesn't mean that they're going to go forward. It doesn't mean I'm going to reject them either. It'll depend on how the interview goes.
Now, you've inadvertently also raised a very important point here, Peter, is that you've talked about the role of the recruiter not just as a gatekeeper between the candidate and the job, but very much as a coach as well on how to be more successful. And I think a lot of young scientists don't realise that facet.
Sorry, Dave, I was trying to interrupt. Apologies. So part of my philosophy is that I think everyone deserves a job. If I can help someone in their career develop their career and obtain a job, whatever job that is, if it's not with my client, not through me, that's okay. People spend time and effort in getting qualifications to then pursue a career, and if I can help them achieve their first step in their career, then I feel it's a good thing to do.
Absolutely agreed. And I'm sure now that Soraya's back with us,
I don't know what's happening on my end. Sorry, guys. It keeps disconnecting.
Right. Well, we've just been talking.
What are we up to?
Talking very briefly about the role of the recruiter, not just as a gatekeeper, but also as a coach. Now, being, an early career scientist, this must be particularly close to your heart. I imagine that when you're talking to other young scientists, you're really trying to help them get a leg up as well. Oh, we just lost her again. Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the next section of the presentation. Okay, so Philip, is there anything a candidate can do to improve their chances of getting an interview?
I think preparation and for the interview, and also every time that I will run an information session about our programs, every time that they will apply for the internship that we do run, the mentoring, is having the, it's not enough to do just to submit a resume nowadays. You have to dig deep with the job advertisement, the selection criteria, answering it right. So and then also we suggest having a market, like a career or a character marketing, or I don't know how to say, I forgot the word, but it's just a simple one-page summary of what you've done. It's different from the resume. So we use that or giving the concise or clear experience answer to the selection criteria that will help to improve their chance to getting an interview.
Okay, excellent. Now, Scott, you interviewed many young people right at the beginning of their career. What could they do to help them get that interview with you? What was the distinguishing factors that made the difference of getting that interview?
I'll look at in some cases I've met the person, chatted to them, and then, you know, if I say this role's here, you're going to apply for it, you know what I mean? You've already got an interview. That's pretty obvious, isn't it, really? So look at it's the resume. For us, it's lots of resumes. So it always sounds horrible. You're culling through them. You're trying to find a way to reject half of them at the start. So if you tell you want to be a chemical engineer and it's an analyst job, I'm not going to read it any further than that. You know what I mean? You know, if you want to be one, fine. Just don't write it on the top. You know what I mean? When you get your first job. So it's really that side. I think that you lose it, and then our process generally is we'll try and, if you get as far as the resume side, we'll then do a quick telephone interview. HR will do that, and it's really that you communicate effectively on the phone. Be handy if people add voice messages and things. A lot of people, it just rings out and there's no, and HR get really annoyed with people they can't leave messages with because they have to phone them back again, which seems quite common now. I don't know why.
Really? Right. Well, Peter, what can someone do to have a better chance of getting an interview with you?
So I agree with Scott around the CV side, and we still get a lot of CVs. But also in terms of if I'm giving guidance to someone around getting a role, getting a job, it's being where the hiring managers are. So going to conferences and that sort of thing, being able to have that personal connection with potentially a hiring manager. So when you see an ad being raised for that company, you can ring up that person and go, oh, by the way, I've seen this ad. Do you think I'd be a relevant candidate? So that's really building up a network, which is hard for 22-year-olds or early career professionals, to be able to do, to be a bit out there and make that approach. But back to the CV, I agree exactly with what Scott's saying in terms of it needs to be on point. So mistakes get amplified. So spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes, applying for a different job and sending in the same covering letter, all those things are turn-offs for a recruiter who's looking at lots and lots of resumes. And then what Philip was saying exactly around selection criteria, in terms of in an ad, make sure you're answering those selection criteria. And if you want to replace a covering letter with a selection criteria that actually puts those points that are in the selection criteria and then treat them as questions and answer those questions as a separate part of your CV, then that actually makes it really easy for the recruiter to go, this person knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I love to receive a selection criteria as a separate document. It really, it makes things easy at my end.
Look, you make a good point on the networking type events, because it is two-way. Like, if I'm going to an event and we've got open positions, I'm looking, you know what I mean? So, and if I meet you, it's a lot easier than a piece of paper with a resume. I know then whether you're roughly going to fit. I can tell by a more relaxed conversation, because you get nervous in interviews and clam up. If you can get them talking a bit more, you're not doing open heart surgery in our laboratory, you know what I mean? You just predict what you are like, and it's difficult sometimes in the interview. So, yeah, if you turn up, it's not just like you're going to be bothering me. I might have an open position that might be good for you.
There really is no replacement for networking. The reward for the time invested is massively disproportionate. At the graduate level, even at the graduate level, you're significantly more likely to get a job through a network than you are through an advertised position.
Which I must say, that was my case. So during my last semester of university, I managed to score myself a lab technician role, and it was pretty much through my networks, really. It's just and it was the networks I gained through the mentoring program. So yeah, that's why kind of building your networks as soon as possible when you're at uni is so critical, because you just don't know how it may help you or assist you in kind of getting your first job post uni.
Absolutely. Okay, so right.
The other one is, Dave, I'd like to talk about is the ATS, applicant tracking systems, and the growth of that area and AI to an extent. So in terms of your CV, it needs to have keywords in there. More and more people are adopting AI, and so if your CV doesn't have the keywords in there, then it won't get to the top ranking from the AI point of view. So that's also really important to recognise that.
And that's why it's important to tailor your resume for every application that you apply for. Absolutely. Okay. So, Peter, while you're talking, what can a candidate do to prepare for an interview with you?
Well, what's going to impress me is if I've shared the client with them, that they've done research on the client and understand what business they're in, challenges might be. So doing that background work on the client is something to say will impress me. And being organised and on time, so recognising where we are, making sure that they don't arrive late. So those sort of things that don't require skills to be on time. So that's probably the main thing I should say is in terms of they've done their research into the client, and even like interviewed someone yesterday who'd actually done research on our organisation and knew who my fellow teammates were. Don't go as far as stalking, as I suggest, but perhaps wait until we've met before you join me on LinkedIn. But do enough preparation that it's a comfortable conversation. We can both have the level of understanding of the client.
Absolutely. Soraya, preparing for an interview with you, what can a candidate do?
What a candidate do to prepare? Pretty much to really kind of, I think before going into any interview, really reflect on your strength and kind of what skills you do possess, and kind of really work on how you can really articulate them in an interview. I think most candidates that do come in, and when I do kind of start asking them about their strength, they really don't know how to kind of communicate that until I kind of start diving deeper into my question. So kind of really working on how you can really, I guess, highlight those in a way through example, I think is really good. So I guess pretty much, which will require a bit of reflection. So really kind of go through the process of reflecting on what your strengths are and kind of work on a strategy of how you can articulate that in an interview.
Now that's very interesting because you've talked a lot about, preparing those things before you go. So then it brings neatly to my next question is, can a candidate bring notes to an interview?
For me, yes. So long as you're not kind of just, as long as you're maintaining eye contact with me and just kind of referring to your notes every now and then, that's fine. It just goes to me, it shows me that they're really serious, that they really want to make sure that they get kind of everything across to me, and that they've really kind of done their homework, or they've gone through the effort of really taking the time out to really kind of reflect, research, or do whatever needs to be done in preparation for that interview. So yes, I think bringing in notes is fine, just as long as you maintain eye contact and you're not reading directly from your notes.
Sure. And Scott, you talked before about, having a bank of star stories ready to talk about. Notes can come to the fore there because, of course, you can pre-do it. I guess the key thing then is make sure that they're the right choice for the right question.
Yeah, look, they're going to be prompts, aren't they? So that's fine. I don't think that. I'm sure there's some people out there who think you can't take notes like it's some kind of exam, but why not? At least you're showing that you're prepared, aren't you? You're turning up with some information.
So,
and I agree with that. I think having your own CV, if it's been an application by a CV, having your own CV there as well, and that's to what Soraya was saying about preparing and reflecting. Your CV should be something where your star stories come from. It's the achievement made that you're most proud of. That should be being used as your star story. And then the second part of the notes would be questions you want to ask. So again, back to the chances of impressing me would be you've done your research, but there's things that you don't know and you can't find. What's the size of the team that I'll be working for? Those sorts of questions. Because if you don't ask any questions at the interview, either near the beginning or at the end or any time, then why are you interested?
Very well said.
And there's nothing wrong with a bit of small talk at the start, you know what I mean, when you come in. Show that you're a real person and talk about the weather or the journey there, or you're having a good day or anything, just to break the ice at the start.
Absolutely. Because what you said early in the piece, Philip, was that, it's bad when somebody comes in robotically spouts career stuff as opposed to talking like a human being.
Yeah. So I think our company, we're looking for authenticity. So being you, being the real you, because we don't like to employ people with like, this is not you. This is just a make believe you. We want the real you, the real person, because we will be working with you for a long time.
Absolutely, and that's a key point. You got to be you. You be the best version of you, but you got to be you.
And also when bringing notes, I just want to add with that, because because a lot of students that when attending interview, not everyone will have the same level of confidence in attending an interview. Like having the resume or other notes that you need to like questions, for example, I think that will be serve as a guide, and also as long as you don't lose your engagement to the interviewer, I think that will bringing notes should be okay.
Absolutely. But then you have raised the key point of nerves. People get nervous before their interviews. How do you look what do you do about when you have a candidate with nerves, Soraya? How do you help them?
So I offer them water. I think offering, like, I'll stop and say, would you like a glass of water in the middle of the interview? I do that every now and then. Otherwise, I'll ask a different question. I'll kind of, put whatever question that I've just asked on hold that seems to have, put them in a state of nerves, and just say, well, okay, let's maybe talk about, say, something else that's probably less maybe stressful, I guess. So I'll definitely kind of maybe change the question and get back to that particular question, later in the interview. So that's one strategy I use.
Scott?
Yeah, I must admit, I feel like I should just give them some water, because the amount of people who say no when they really need it, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing wrong. You've talked about this at length before, Dave, about always take the water, always. You're probably bored of saying that because you say it so often, because it's not difficult. But yeah, look, funny thing is that this was a more senior role. He was going to be a lab supervisor. He came in for the interview. He was really nervous. He sweated profusely through the whole thing. He answered the questions fine. Tell you what, at least he cared. I could tell he cared. He wanted it. So not the end of the world to be nervous, as long as you can answer the questions.
Yeah.
But yeah, look. As I say, you're not going to go into really, really high tension situations in the workplace. So we want you to try and be relaxed, so we can get to learn what you like. So yeah, trying to make it casual at the start, have a bit of a chat. When you come and have an interview at our place, it's smart, casual. You don't have to wear a tie and all that stuff, because it's a laboratory area. Don't come in shorts and t-shirt, but it really is trying to do that from the outset if we can.
And Peter, how do you coach? How do you help a nervous candidate get them ready for the interview with the employer?
Yeah, so I think coaching based on the performance on the interview with me, that'll give a lot of material to be able to work with. But just before I go on to that, Scott said something earlier around small talk at the start of an interview to help with nerves. And that, to be honest, is probably the interviewer's responsibility to try and relax the candidate. Because you don't get the best out of the person in terms of if they are nervous and unable to articulate what they want to be able to tell you. But in terms of coaching someone, so we'll actually go through interview tips and tricks. We'll provide them written information. We'll actually give them a star story pro forma, which will help them understand the sorts of questions they'll get asked. And I had a very senior person who was 30-year career, had a few jobs, not a lot. I really had to help him and coach him to a point where he was able to answer behavioural-based questions. And he got his university degree aged daughter to work with him over the weekend and practice answering interview questions. And he got the job. So, but our assessment after that was on the Monday. We actually ran another behavioural interview question, short interview with one of our recruiters for 15 minutes, just to make sure that he'd actually understood how to present himself. So we gave him that pressure and stress to learn over the weekend with his daughter. He did. We passed our interview, 15-minute interview on the phone with one of our recruiters, presented him to the candidate, and he actually got the job. So coaching is like I say, it's so important, and probably perhaps against, because I've only been a recruiter for 4 years, the the thing about recruiters is that they're trying to make the right decision, but based on what the candidate presents. And so the skill in a recruiter is actually to allow the candidate to show what they're able to do the job. And an interview is an artificial construct. When you get the job, you don't actually do interviews. You're actually doing the job. So it's actually a separate skill set to do an interview to what is actually performing on the bench in a lab, for example. So as a recruiter, what you're trying to understand is how that person can show their ability to do the job in a way that actually makes the interview go smoothly with the client.
Absolutely, well said. So while I've got you then, are there any tricks that you use to judge a candidate before, during and after an interview?
Tricks, well, I think there's a lot of ways of doing that in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily call them tricks, but...
Sorry, but maybe I'll just clarify the question. I read recently that one of the senior Google executives, when he's interviewing a candidate, the thing that he looks for is, at the end of the interview, do they pick up their coffee cup and go to take it back to the kitchen, or do they just leave it for someone else to take care of? And that tells them a lot about the attitudes of that candidate.
Mm.
So what I'm looking for is those little things, not the professional things, but I guess the little markers, the little approaches that you use to determine, you know, something extra about the client.
About the candidate. Yeah. So I think in terms of little behavioural things around, you know, how you greet someone, shake their hand, smile, eye contact, as Soraya said before, in terms of if they don't make good eye contact, then you're going, that's sort of something I'd suggest. Maybe they're shy and nervous, so you've got to try and, you know, uncover that. And if you can't get to the point where they are, then you've got to actually talk about it directly and go, I feel like, you know, we're not communicating well because you're not looking in the eye. Of course, you need to have some cultural sensitivity, because it may not be someone who's from an ethnic background that is good at trying eye contact. So you have to recognise that as well.
Well, I mean, I'll give you the example. When I do an interview, I almost always, like, we don't have reception at my company, but I'll almost always have a desk there and someone sitting there as a receptionist when the candidate arrives, because the way they interact with that receptionist pretty much says to me how they're going to interact with everybody.
Mm.
Scott, tips and tricks?
Yeah. Look, you've said most of them. Like, don't think we're not going to ask the receptionist what they were like. Don't think the lab tour is not part of the interview. Ask questions. Show that you're interested in the laboratory. Look, and you made a good point about the cup. I must admit that I work with clients a lot. So if I go and see a client, they offer me a cup of coffee, I'm going to ask if I can wash that cup up. You know what I mean? Because they pay the bills. So it's not a bad one, to be honest. Can I put this glass of water somewhere? You know, I've got to be in whatever. Look, all of those things, I think it's just about, just the general about just ask questions at the end. You've already talked about this. Just make sure you ask a couple of questions, no matter what they are, really. Just ask some questions to show you're interested.
That actually is a perfect segue there, because what are good questions for a candidate to ask you? Scott, you might as well continue.
Just asking a bit more, like you've talked about there, you get people who would, I'll tell you what, there was a guy that came for an interview in sample receipts, so they're going to be logging in samples, and he literally went, can I go and have a look upstairs? Can you show me how you log a sample in? I wouldn't mind quickly seeing one, you know, blah, blah. He literally talked about the role. And all right, fair enough. And he had the role then, basically, anyway, but it's not the point. It just literally into the specifics of the role. Can you show me where I'll be working? Who else is in the team? You know, not just walking around and scared to say anything. So really about that stuff is great.
That's a really good candidate. Soraya, good questions for candidates to ask you in an interview.
Good questions. I guess them asking about maybe the company culture, them showing that they're really interested about finding out more about the company and how they may be able to fit in. So I find that's always a good question. I think most candidates don't come in with enough questions or don't even ask any questions. So that's always disappointing. But yeah.
Excellent. Philip, what about yourself? What do you like to hear?
I think hearing about, for example, one question that I've been asked is, what does success look like in this position? and how do you measure it? So I think having a ready questions, even though it's not even good questions like what is your favorite part about working in the company? So it's more like, maintaining that engagement, because even though the interview it's over, let's finish, you say, thank you for attending the interview. Do you have any questions? So I think having a couple of good questions to maintain that engagement with the interviewer will be good.
Very well said. Those are two of my favourite questions, by the way. Peter, what do you like to hear?
It is quite funny. Sometimes I've been asked the question, I can't think of an example right now, but I didn't really have a very good answer. The question was too hard, every time.
I think what Philip was saying is one of my key questions as well, in terms of, how will success be measured, and how will I know that I'm successful? And so it shows that they're in the mindset where they're thinking about the role. The other one I quite like to understand that the candidate will ask is, why is the role vacant? Because it could be then lead to other questions. Oh, it's actually because the company's growing and it's a new role. It's not replacing someone. That then they can then ask more questions, going, what space are they going into? How are they doing that? And then what would really impress me is if they can then lead into that question with their own answer, in terms of what I do in this situation is do this. Because that then says they're able to solve my client's problem, which is growth, and they're going to be able to come on board and be able to cope with that growth, whatever it needs to be, with its compliance or whatever it is that needs to be done. So that's what's also going to be able to turn the question into an area of opportunity for them to showcase what they can do.
Absolutely. So Philip, what's a bad question for a candidate to ask?
I think two personal questions. Like once I was asked, why do you like to wear that color? Why? It's very personal. There's a lot of very personal question that I've been asked. So I think avoid any personal questions.
That is an odd question.
Yeah, so very, very. So I don't know. It's like me. It's like interview the interviewer. It's like, okay.
I think the obvious one is, you don't ask, how soon can I move up the ranks?
True.
You're laughing, Scott. You've heard this one, haven't you?
Well, sometimes, yeah. Look, actually, there's an example from. Actually, I won't name the person because she told me the example, but just think who's interviewing you. So the owner of the company is interviewing you, and your question is, do you like working here? You know what I mean? Think about who it is. You know what I mean? No, I hate it. I think it's got a bad culture. No. So yes, just know your audience. That's all.
But the variation to that question, why do people like working here, is a good question.
Yeah, indeed.
Peter, questions you recommend against?
Yeah, I think there's lots of bad questions. Ones that are off topic, as Philip said, that are not related to the job. So make the questions relevant, and being able to avoid questions like, if you know that, for example, that the start time is, the lab starts at 8 o'clock, asking, can I start at 8:30? That's going to set things off on the wrong path.
Yeah, fair play. All right, so then, Peter, while I've still got you, hang on a sec. What do you wish candidates would do more often in an interview?
Everyone's an individual, so it's hard to put a blanket across everybody. In general, what I'd like candidates is to be honest, but a lot of candidates are honest. It's the ones that are trying to pull the wool over my eyes that I don't appreciate. So I guess maybe just being authentic and being themselves. So try not to be someone else.
Very good point. Soraya, what would you like to see candidates do more often in an interview?
So I'm not quite sure what was said prior to this because it cut off, but for me, it's just them be themselves. to be quite honest. Just to not go in, because every now and then I do get candidates that have all these scripted responses. It's just to really kind of be able to go in with a bit more confidence and just for them to be them, I guess.
Yeah. Fair enough. Scott, Philip, you want to say anything?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, it just goes down the same kind of avenue, really. You've got to be, like you say, Dave, the best form of yourself, but they have to know who you are, and because if you don't fit, you don't fit. You know what I mean? You might be able to.
And it is pointless taking a job where you're not a good fit. I've done it once, didn't go well.
It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Actually, I've overlooked to answer a question that came in from the audience. I once saw on the internet that a candidate could ask something like, have I said something in this interview that makes you think I'm not good for this role? Do you think this is a bad idea? Peter?
I don't think it's wrong, but it depends on context. So, I think it also depends on the relationship and rapport you've got with the recruiter as to whether they're going to receive that question okay. Because if they are, then it's absolutely the right question to ask. Because what it's then doing is making the recruiter reflect on that question and going, well, actually, this is what it was. And then you've got a chance to repeat. Now, quite rare, but it's certainly positive if the recruiter is open to that and you can judge that. And that takes, empathy and understanding the recruiter and where they're coming from as well, and whether they're reading from a script, whether it's a conversation or whether it's a tick box interview. This is the question, this is the answer. Because if it's a second, then that question probably won't work.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Absolutely. Philip, this is an interesting question.
Yeah. So, sorry, is that okay if you can repeat the question for me?
Is it okay for someone to say, have I said something in this interview that makes you think I'm not good for the role? Is that a good idea or a bad idea to say?
I think it really depends on the, I don't know how to say it, but I think in my opinion, it will be okay. It will be good to ask that question, because it's more like you're being honest. And the interviewer, there's a chance like, you can, that's a time that you can answer that in all honesty, or you can word it in a way that to tell the candidate that you are not the right fit for the role, and together with an example of the role or what will be the responsibility of that job.
Yeah. Scott,
if I can have the microphone back again, sorry, Dave. I think I'd probably paraphrase the question and ask it slightly differently, so it's not quite so black and white. I would try and paraphrase it to a point where, is there anything that's you've got any reservations about my ability to do the job? Is there one area that you didn't get the information out of me that you wanted? So
that's a better question.
Yeah. So perhaps paraphrase that question. I think it is a powerful question if you've got the ability to ask it, because there's, once you walk out the door, the interviewer is probably already 75% made a decision, in Scott's case 95% made a decision. So if you walk out the door without having gone back to that, I made a mistake on that question, I'd like to repeat it, and you get a chance, then that can be the difference between gaining a job and not.
Yeah. But Scott, my attitudes to relentless positivity, particularly in the interview. I guess I would be looking to phrase that from a positive perspective. Is there a way I could answer that better? Is there, something like that? But your thoughts?
Yeah, look, as it's worded, it's certainly a brave question, isn't it? Because it might just be taken the wrong way. Or look, you might just put the interviewer on the spot and doesn't want to be really honest, brutally honest to you. It wants to just kind of quietly say no later on if it doesn't go very well. But the way Peter worded it, that one would never be knocked back. That just like rewording it like that was perfect. Fantastic question to ask.
Do we want to discuss pet hates in an interview, or have we sort of covered that? I think we've largely covered that already. Does anyone want to jump in with something?
Yeah, I do. Pet hates is when people are late.
Oh, never ever be late. And I've got to say
actually the opposite. If you turn up 35 minutes before the interview to a business place, sit outside until 10 minutes before and come in. Don't come in half an hour before, because we're busy and we're doing something else in that period of time.
Never late, never early. You arrive early, wait outside, and turn up on time. It's a pretty simple formula.
Yeah.
Honestly, we've had interviews at ALS where people have turned up 45 minutes early and sat down in reception. I'm like, I'm going to make you sit there for 45 minutes. And unfortunately, upstairs, I've probably thought, I'm already thinking no before I even walk down the stairs. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I get it. Okay. So then how should a candidate follow up, Philip, after the interview is over?
Yeah, I think before close of business day, just about thanking up like for your time and everything, and then another follow up within the couple of days. And
Philip and Peter, if you want the job, say so, right?
I think so. For me, the end of the interview would be the chance to talk about next steps and the process from there. So if I'm saying to a candidate, I'll make a shortlist, by the end of Friday, then all I'm wanting from you is a little note saying, hey, thanks for your time in the next 24 hours. A little bit more than that, but and maybe an expression of I'm even more enthusiastic about the role now that we've talked about it, which is not necessarily asking for the job, but it's certainly given me a strong indication that you are. And then, next Friday, when you haven't heard, then following me up and going, hey, just wondered how you're tracking with that. I know you're going to do it by Friday. Have you presented, am I on your shortlist? And because a recruitment agency is a partner for someone's career, but they're not perfect. We're not perfect. Things happen and Friday may come and go and we haven't done what we said we were going to do because something's come on top of it. So no harm to chase up and follow up and go, how is that tracking? And that's going to impress me in terms of you're not going in there going, did I make the shortlist? You're going, just how are you travelling? Have you managed to complete that? Because that's respectful. So we're looking for someone who's respectful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So another question that came from the floor in advance. How do students cross the barrier from university to the workplace if they haven't managed to get experience, if all of their experience to date has been just academic? Who wants to have a go? Scott, look, it looks like you're about to open your mouth.
Must have been a funny facial expression. Look, it is a tricky one. Look, if you can get just a bit of experience, it's good. But through uni, being able to get a couple of weeks of kind of free work experience is good because it's easy for the employer to kind of take you with that. But yeah, look. To be honest, it is tough if you've gone through school and university and you haven't had a part-time job. You know what I mean? It's not. I'm not saying it looks bad, but it's good to have shown that you've gone above and beyond. You've done something extra. You've earned your own money. And you've got experience then. And that's having a part-time job. Whether that's, for me, it was Burger King and a supermarket and a deli counter. What's wrong with that? So, look, it is tough. Otherwise, you're going to have to end up relying on networking and your resume, really, aren't you? What else are you going to rely on if you haven't got it?
Isn't that the point? I mean, Scott and Sarai's back with us for however long that might be. But Peter, isn't a large part of it, you build your network gives you opportunities to get a little bit of work experience, and your work experience gets you your first job.
Absolutely. And as part of our UniWorks program, we talked about at the start where undergraduates get a chance to work in a context and it's the try before you buy from the client side. If you do good performance there and they like you and they have an opening, then you're likely to get employed because you're not a known quantity. So I think getting relevant experience is really useful. If you don't, and we have candidates who for whatever reason can't, and they have to support themselves and get part-time jobs working in like a supermarket or a fast food joint. That happens too, and we recognise that as recruiters that not everyone gets a chance to work in their field. So in terms of how do you make yourself more attractive, it's just polishing your resume, and then in terms of your cohort, university cohort, who have got out there and got jobs, you're making sure that they know that you're looking for a job, and if something comes up in a place of employment, that your name gets put forward. So again, that comes back to networking.
But it also raises the key point that through your UniWorks program, you're not just exposing the students, the students to the employers. You're also getting to know them yourselves, and you're getting to know who the star candidates are and the ones who, as a business, you're going to be able to place more easily.
Mm. Absolutely, absolutely, and even things like being reliable, turning up when work's on. If you do, then it's a tick in our book. If you don't, if you're constantly calling in, then you're not going to be as attractive. Yeah, and in terms of, we get feedback from the client side, because obviously we want to keep them happy, and so if they're unhappy with work performance, or lack of attention to detail, if it's sample receipt or whatever it is, then they're also going to get down the pecking order in terms of being someone we can place when they graduate.
Absolutely. So that brings me really to the final question to each of our participants. Philip, we'll start with you. Any other interview tips and suggestions? What have we missed this evening?
I think we've mentioned I think majority of the tips that we could do, to increase securing an interview or being successful for that dream job. I think I just want to reiterate the importance of being authentic, being engaging, being positive, and also being honest about what you can do and what can you offer, and also bringing what are your selling points and the reasons why you want that job, and prepare to get into having that determination, showing that you have the character in performing the role or the job.
Excellent. Scott, anything we've missed? Any other tips?
Philip's answer was way too good. I should reiterate all of those points, and he had half of them that I wouldn't have thought of. So no, yeah. Look, just have specific examples when you get asked the questions. That's the easiest one. I wish you're just not answering the question. You've got nothing to go on. Like star stories we started with. So.
All right. I'm going to give the final word to Peter, but before I do, I'm going to add my little 2 cents in. Just remember that even if you're going for a science job, the science job that you are doing is part of a business. If you can talk about yourself and the achievements that you've had in the past in terms of the contribution they've made to the business, not just to the science, then it makes you more desirable as an employee. It shows that you understand the context of why you are working for a business. Peter, final comments to you.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right, Dave. And that helps the interviewer think about you as already being in the job. And that's essentially what you want to get to at the end of the interview, where the person interviewing you can consider you as in the role, performing. Because if they can't form that view, then you're probably not going to get the job. In terms of other tips would be explain your story. So if you're a middle-aged career person who's moved around lots of jobs, then don't leave the elephant in the room there without explaining how you got to where you've got to, because that's potentially comes across as not being open and honest. So for your own individual story around how you got to where you got to, help the interviewer understand how you've arrived at this point in your life. And that's an easy question to answer at the start of an interview in terms of tell us about yourself, is making sure that that's not a 5-minute monologue, or in some cases a 60-minute monologue, which I've had for a mid-career person, and the end of the interview comes up with having asked one question. So it's making sure that the interviewer gets a sense of who you are in a pretty short space of time. So 1 minute, 2 minutes. So as part of that is your elevator pitch. If you develop an elevator pitch, if you happen to bounce into someone at a conference, you met Scott in a chemistry convention in New South Wales, and Scott said, "Oh, hello, who are you?" You'll be able to say who you are in 30 seconds, so that he remembers you. Later on, when he sees your CV, he remembers you. So that's not necessarily an interview tip, but it's a personal connection tip in terms of working on those networks.
Absolutely. Since you're back, Soraya, now
yes, I don't know what's going on my end. I apologise.
No, you don't need to apologise. I feel bad. You must be just about out of hair by now. You must have ripped it all out.
It is quite stressful, I must say, but anyway.
But look, we're down to the last question of the evening. Any final interview tips and suggestions?
Any final tips or suggestions? Pretty much just do your research in terms of kind of if you know the company that you're applying for. Make sure you know what they're offering and what you can offer in return, I guess. So yeah, research is pretty much important.
And remember, everybody, you can use your network to help you research. You don't have to try and reinvent the wheel yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Tonight has been another event as part of the RACI Careers Development Program. Through webinars, networking events, mentoring, lectures and workshops, the RACI Career Development Program aims to help graduating students get the best possible start in their careers. This has been the 5th and last webinar in this year's series, but if you have any topics that we haven't already covered, we'd love to hear from you, and we can always schedule some more. All of our stuff we have a lot of careers material at www.raci.org.au. I would also reiterate that CS Executive has their UniWorks program, and that's definitely worth a look at if you are in Victoria. It's not national at the moment, is it, Peter?
Sorry, yes, no, certainly Melbourne, the area is our focus at the moment. We're partners with a variety of universities down here, and then as it becomes successful, then we'll look to roll it out into more states.
Absolutely. So your Melbourne-based students, that's definitely for you. And remember also that the Australian National Disability Network, I've got to get this right, I've got to get it right, Australian Network on Disability. The Australian Network on Disability also has programs in support of people with a range of disabilities. And so if that applies to you, by all means, you should look them up because they do also have a great mentoring program, not just in the sciences, but in business as well. In the meantime, I would like to thank all of our presenters tonight, Soraya Jamar, Scott Colburn, Peter Rowe and Philip Zamora. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Dave.
Okay.